Hey guys, Tim Adams here, and we have a special guest this week. It is my wife, Anna. She has decided to weigh in on this topic of wounding this episode. And this is a very heavy topic and one that we want to approach with care and a lot of prayer. We prayed before we hit record. And a lot of that is because not only is it a heavy topic, but it's also a very broad topic. We are all wounded in one way or another. And the way that those wounds interface with our life, for a good portion of our lives, all of our life, if we never address them, is significant. And it bears discussing. And those of you who have read the books of John Eldredge are going to be very familiar with what we're going to be talking about today, but it's never a bad idea to go over it again. So, in his books, specifically Wild at Heart, John Eldredge talks about a progression of what happens when we receive a wound. And you can jump in anytime you want. This is going to be interesting because we've never done this before. So I'm a little nervous, but I'm also excited because, well, you'll see. Usually our life-defining wounds are given to us in childhood. And there's this idea that the source or the place of our greatest wounding is also the place of our greatest strength. The idea behind that is if our enemy can take us out in the area that, we are strongest in from a very young age, then he wins because we're not as effective as we could be. We're not as engaged as we could be because emotions and wounds and all of the things surrounding that, which we'll get into, it's just so complicated. And part of, I believe, the reason that we don't address the wounds that we receive is largely because we don't really want to pop the hood and know what's going on in there. As long as it gets us from here to there, John likes to talk about when you hear a strange noise emanating from your car engine, you kind of dread popping the hood or finding out what's going on with it. So in a lot of ways, we just create this approach to life that seems to work for us, and we just never deal with it. And the way that John describes it, and I've personally experienced this, so, it's not just unconfirmed speculation. This is what I've experienced myself. Somebody will say something or do something to us that hurts us in a very deep and, significant way. Out of that, we get a message that wound carries. So, for example, in my life, in the middle of my 8th grade year, I lost my dad. He died suddenly and unexpectedly. And then a year later, my last remaining grandfather died. And I've had several significant men, specifically men, in my life die or move away or somehow exit my life. And the message that I get is don't create deep, meaningful relationships with another man because they're not going to stay. And that may not sound so bad, but if you think about how we learn, the process in which we learn what it is to be a man, how to be a man, what does a man do, specifically good men, that is something that comes from other men. And that's not something that a woman can bestow on a man. Masculinity bestows masculinity. And when you have these significant influential men being taken out of your life, you're kind of left in limbo. And you're left asking, how do I be a man? How do I be the man that God created me to be? What does that look like? So for me, it's been really significant. And it really does create a sense of loss and longing. Because if you think about, my dad didn't get to see me graduate 8th grade. He didn't get to see me start high school, date a girl, get married, have kids, succeed, start my own business. Any of those significant life events that we attribute and maybe sometimes take for granted, those were very real and significant events in my life that had this hole, this missing presence. And, sometimes the wounds that we get, they don't manifest in terms of their significance and their meaning and the power that they have for many, many years. And all of a sudden, something triggers it, and you're just wiped out and overwhelmed, and you don't know what to do. So it's important that we understand that with the wounds come messages, and those messages should not be ignored, because those lead to agreements. And I don't know if you want to hop in here with any personal stories.
So the message I got within the Christian community as a woman is, and because you have to be useful, honestly, you have to be in service, which actually explains why a lot of women are in the kitchen or in the children's ministry. And like, if we have a woman that is in a different position outside of family, whatever, it's weird. And it's hard for people to kind of understand that. Like, women, we get bored. It's such a weird space for me because, like, I've had so many things breathed into my life. I'm upfront with people. The world is a very scary place, and I've learned that the message that I've gotten, captivating, Eldridge, hit on the nose. I have never felt so attacked in my life.
So true.
Reading Captivate. I am chapter 2, and I'm about to toss this book out the window. But the message that I got in life, especially in the Christian community became very unsafe.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't come across as a safe woman, because I'm not proactive in the church. I'm not in the kids ministry. By the way, kids are great. They're irritating, but they're, I don't see myself in that position, and I don't really cook well, which is the reason why my husband cooks.
It's true.
But what the message that I got, that the Christian community gave me, and that the world and everything, was, I'm not worth it. I'm not good enough. I'm better off dead because I'm a certain way. And it's both frustrating and sad that I can understand why there are women in the church that are exhausted, because they give so much of everything, yet they get no real credit, like outside of Mother's Day. Yee! It's just, or Father's Day for men. And the message that I've watched the men in my life, the women in my life, the women like me, we're looked at as the problem of the church. The church doesn't, they ask individuals that have my personality to leave. I don't feel welcomed.
Because they don't know what to do with you.
They really don't.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, because they ask individuals like me to come, but then they kick us out just as quickly.
It's like they don't really expect you to take them up on that.
Yeah. And it's bizarre that the church asks the people that are not Seventh-day Adventists to come into the church, but what about, it's like, and then all of a sudden I get pointed out, what about your tattoos? What about your hair? Blah, 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 blah.
Which we just shaved today.
Yeah, because because of the lifestyle, because I work with alongside you,
Mm-hmm.
and working alongside you and working with pastors, leaderships, and I get the same look. You don't belong. Why are you here? You are the problem. Da 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 da. And I'm like, "Eek, I gotta go do stuff." So, you know it. But it's weird though because so I call God Dad.
Yes.
I've cussed him out long enough. It's fine. We have that. And it's not only that, it's just when I call him God, there's such a separation between me and him. And it bothers me because he's always there. He sees through my bullshit. He knows who I am. And yet he's still like, hey, daughter, you're precious to me. And it's bizarre because this world doesn't say that enough to us.
No.
To go up to, just to know that there's a Heavenly Father out there that sees us, sees through all of this, you're good, you're bad, and the other, and yet he still celebrates us. He still celebrates us regardless of this, and it's not a message that is shared in the Christian walk, because we want him to be there. We want to put him. I had a beautiful conversation with this lovely lady, Sarah, and she's like, there's an artist that has a picture of a Bible and the person squishing Dad into this Bible. And I was like, that is such a beautiful picture, because that's all I see is comfortable Christianity.
Yep.
And the question that I have is, are you brave enough to let him love you the way you deserve to be loved, or do you want to be in full control over it? And the topic that you chose is really dear to my heart because there are wounding. We see the world in 3 different ways. We see it through our pain, we see it through the world,
Yeah.
and then we see it through Dad, which is rare because we don't get to that point. We don't ask Dad, like, hey, Dad, is there something that I don't see? Where do you want me to be? We never ask Dad to walk with us along that path. There's a poem, and we talked about it. It's The Footprint in the Sand.
Yeah.
And being able to be part of that journey. Like, we don't know when Dad picked us up and carried us. We don't know when we falter. We don't. And it's such a weird space because as a woman, specifically, it's uncomfortable.
Why?
Because I'm not taught to let others truly see me. Because as a Christian woman, that's not what Christians tell. That's not the thing that I was told or taught in the Christian community. It is like, be happy, be useful. That is all.
So given the topic that we're talking about, what has been your experience when Christians see who you really are?
It's always surprised. It's I could have a real conversation with someone. A lot of it right off the bat is she has tattoos. She looks unsafe. And then after they get to know me, you talk about Dad way too much.
Well, sorry, I should have been more specific. Growing up, what was your experience with fellow Christians in terms of how they treated you? How did they accept you? Did they not accept you?
That was too much.
Okay. In what way?
I talked way too much, but a lot of it was a cover-up for me.
For what?
Insecurities.
Mm-hmm.
Big time, because I didn't feel useful enough.
Okay. Let's put a pin in that. So did you hear what she just said? I didn't feel useful enough. Okay, so let's dissect this. She kind of alluded to it, and John John and Stacy, his wife, in Captivating, talk about if you go into a church, a Christian church, and you look around at the women that you find there, how would you describe them? And he offers the suggestion of the word tired, because the women in our churches, generally speaking, are encouraged, actively encouraged to serve more and more and more, in the kitchen, in the children's ministry, in the janitorial, arranging food for the homeless. I mean, it's just outreach after outreach, ministry after ministry. And yeah, I would say it's a fair statement to say that women are tired. They're exhausted, because we equate service with salvation. And that's a whole different can of worms that we might talk about later. But focusing on this wound, message, agreement, and the final step is vow, right? So the wound is that you're not accepted. The message is you're not enough. The agreement is that I'm not useful. And what would you say is the vow out of that? What did you vow to stop doing or to start doing?
I think my biggest vow really was I'm useless. That was my vow. And that I'm never going to be good enough.
You hear that? I will never be good enough. So how would you say that statement impacted your adolescent life?
Oh, so with that message in mind, the devil had more of an opening to filter in. I got into a bunch of stuff I should have never got into, but mostly suicidal thoughts, because I was better off dead, because I'm not useful enough to the church. I had no value. And because I had no value, because it was structured on that, I was better off dead. And as a person, as specifically for myself, I can't really talk for anybody else, struggling with suicidal thoughts regularly, and then getting out of that fog, because it's like being dad himself letting me know, it's like, daughter of mine, just chill. But him specifically in Captivating, chapter 1 and 2, telling me, you are beautiful. You are an Ezer. You're amazing. And holy macadamia. I should just take off my glasses. For me to hear dad, to feel dad's presence, and to walk through all of the wounds and the flames and the turmoils and the places that I felt that I wasn't good enough, and dad going like, where did you get the message that you weren't good enough? Where did you think that I needed whatever, where do you think that you needed to do all of this? Daughter of mine, you didn't have to do this. All you had to ask is, what do you need me to do? That's all. And that just asks us to have a deeper, more meaningful. When I decided to have a more meaningful and deep relationship with dad, it was the most wonderful thing in the world. I stopped being angry. The chaos that fueled everything, just peace. And all of a sudden, I didn't have to depend on those around me.
Yeah.
To filter. I learned very quickly to say yes to those around me is to say no to the God in heaven that said, I adore you. I cherish you. Why are you questioning my love for you? And yet, that's the message I got, Yeah. And I don't think it was meant to happen like that. I do not mean I do not think that the Christian community or any community within the world or otherwise means to put that out there. But yeah, that was a hefty chapter 2. Chapter 2 is a difficult one for me. But
she's working through it.
Yeah. Wanting and anger management, apparently. Because I have to undo the message that the church gave me. I have to undo the message social media gave me. I have to undo the message that I was given to me through the world, through my family. I have, and it's like having a carpet ready, and that's been woven, and then I have to go through those threads.
Yeah.
And Dad is just like, undo it. And so me and Dad are going through this, and it's painful, and it's worth it. And after the chaos and the turmoil, it's an amazing place to be, where you can look at people around you and be like, yeah, I'm okay. I don't need you to tell me I'm good, because my Father in heaven, he tells me every day when I mess up. And I get a lot of it.
This idea that we take these wounds, we hear these messages, we make these agreements, and then we further make these vows that shape how we interact with the world and the people around us for the rest of our lives is immensely important. And, this isn't maybe new information. It's just packaged a little differently. We all know that there are things that we go through in our lives that have this kind of significant impact. But a lot of people, I think, tend to attribute it to recent events that have happened in their lives. They don't necessarily want to dive down deep and go to those memories that can often be extremely painful. That which was laid down in pain can only be accessed in pain. And that's not a comfortable experience at all. There are some, I've heard describe it like being pulled through the eye of a needle backwards. But I think what makes it worth it is the healing and the restoration on the other side, that helps you become that little bit more whole. And when you become a little bit more whole, as in you're reclaiming a part of who you are or who you were created to be, then you become more holy as well. They go together. And so I don't want to get too much into the healing part of it, because that's a whole episode on its own, which will be next week. But I wanted to introduce this idea of wounding because it is immensely important, and it is one that often, particularly in pastors, I think goes not talked about. It goes unmentioned. And one of the main reasons that, we started this podcast, or I started this podcast, was for you guys, the pastors, the ministry leaders, because who do you guys turn to? There should be assets and resources made available to you to help you deal with, a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about. And yet,
there's really none. I think the biggest thing that I've seen among pastors is I have a habit of attracting them. But it's not only me, it's just us in general.
Mm-hmm.
I think pastors forget that they have the right to feel the way they feel. They have every right to feel. If you're frustrated, be frustrated. It may not be at the church, but you are an extension of Dad. You're an extension of his hands, his feet. But you can't be that extension if you're hurting on the inside. The biggest thing that I've learned in life is if you don't feel if you feel attacked, don't be okay with it, but understand that there is an attack. Be okay with the fact that your feelings, they're there.
Mm-hmm.
And go to Dad with that. Be okay with being uncomfortable. The journey of healing, the journey with the wounding. You may not know this, but a lot of pastors that I've met along the way, I can hear the pain in their voice when they preach about certain things that are near and dear to their heart. And they're walking through that journey. I call it the journey of healing, but a lot of it's just kind of skeletons because it's painful and it's uncomfortable. And I believe that, I know in my heart that pastors need to understand that it's okay not to be okay. And that dad, he knows more than anybody, but he's not far away from you. And it's not okay to be like, oh no, like to push your feelings to the side and say, but I'm a pastor. And I was like, yeah, but you're not dad. So be fair. Because you are fathers, your uncles, you're somebody to someone else. You're not just a pastor. You're Dad's most precious design. Dad anointed you specifically to be in a place in front of the church to represent him in a way that speaks to each individuals within that space. And it's not okay if you're hurting on the inside because there was a loss or something, and you're trying to be like, no, it's okay. It's like, why are you trying to put Dad in a box in that place? And why is he a mask? Because there are times where I'm like, that's a mask. And I don't mind it so much. What I don't understand is, why not let Dad walk you through that pain? Why not take a day off and be like, yo, I can't preach right now. And I need to go with my family, or I need to just take a break and go to the wilderness. My husband went to a camp before we got married. And Dad told me like, hey, I need your husband back. And I was like, all right, cool. And then I told my husband, before we get married, I need you to go out to this event. And we went back and forth. I won because Dad wanted him back. And Dad wanted to have conversations with my husband before we said our I do's. As leaders in the church and leader within your own family, I know it's okay for you to feel the way you feel and not to dismiss it, but to feel it and then ask Dad, hey, I'm in pain right now and it sucks. Walk through it with Dad. Because I can assure you, he cannot fit in a box. You can try. But he's an amazing God that wants so badly to have intimate, most precious relationship with his kids that he himself anointed. And I don't think it's fair for him, or I don't think it's fair for you to assume that he belongs in a box when Dad himself is reaching out to you and saying, you are my adorned, most precious. And I think most of you guys should always feel like you are being adorned, you're being protected and loved and cherished by Dad himself. And I really want to pray for the churches and pastors out there. And I have. Because actually that's the calling that Dad has me out for. But outside of that, don't cut yourself short. Feel Dad through. And if you need to cuss or swear just to get that out, that frustration, because that's where you're at, Dad gets it.
He's big enough. He can take it. I assure you. I think it's also important to understand that there's a lot of pain and wounding that comes from the hands of your members. There are some very, very wounded people out there. There are some very broken people out there. And if there's anything that we know, it's that woundedness and brokenness only breeds more woundedness and brokenness. And when you're interacting with a difficult person, particularly inside the church, it could be helpful to understand and remember that what you're dealing with, what you're interacting with, is their pain or their fear. It's not necessarily who they are. Now, that doesn't excuse that behavior, particularly when it's aimed at you, but it might help steer you in a different direction rather than being confrontational or defensive. However, there are times when it's important to put those boundaries down and say, no, this is the line and you've crossed that line. And, Paul outlines a very specific process to follow in terms of addressing behavior that it falls outside what's okay. But I did want to bring up this idea, this concept of what goes into wounding and what comes out of it, not just for you guys to utilize within your own ministries, but also within your own lives, your own personal lives, so that you can at least feel like you might have a skill set that you can employ when it is you take hits. Because as we all know, those hits just keep coming. And I think it's important to remember that the story of your life is one of a long and brutal assault against you by an enemy who knows who you are and fears it. Yeah, that'd be the devil. So, looking at our lives through the lens of warfare, and again, that'll be a separate episode, can help contextualize the things that are happening, the feelings that you're feeling, the issues that are coming up, in your meetings or in between other people. So reframing how we look at daily life, how we look at our interactions with other people, the interactions other people have with us, how we interact with our families. This is a really, really important concept and mindset to get yourself into. And if you're not familiar with the writings of John Eldredge, the books that he's written, specifically Wild at Heart and Captivating, we can't recommend those enough. I've been through Wild at Heart probably 7 times in the last 20 years or so. And every time I go through it, it hits me in a different way because I'm in a different place in my life. And this is your second time through Captivating. You're taking your time.
It hits differently because the first time I felt completely attacked. I still feel attacked, but in a good way. Coming from a space where I'm heavily wounded. And now I have to, again, as I said, I have to reinterpret everything. I have to basically untangle the lie that was spoken into my life and just come back, tell the devil no. And so whatever contract I had with the devil in certain places in my life, I have to be yeah, no, I'm not okay with this. Because now you're attacking my relationship with my Heavenly Father. And I have so many issues with anybody getting between me and my Heavenly Father. Yeah, I have legitimate issues with this. Because I came from a place where I was doing war on myself because I thought I was the problem. Mm-hmm. And then come to find out, I kind of was, let's just be fair. But Dad called me perfect, even though I did certain things. And so now, for you and I, when we have heavy discussions, we pray. Mm-hmm. I know your heart towards me. Yep. And vice versa. And so being able to come to Dad and having him as a center of our relationship, not only of our marriage, but having you have your relationship with Pops and I have mine. And it's created such a space, but always, and I can't push this enough, pray after you're done with church. So whatever spirit is on your congregation individually doesn't follow you home to get between your relationship with your spouse or with your or anybody else, because you're going to go and you're going to cover that in a later, but be aware and be watchful, because a lot of the time there are wounds from your childhood and there's wounds from your past relationships.
Oh my goodness, yes.
So there are agreements that you made in how many relationships specifically that you didn't know were nuclear warfare with your current relationship. and be aware and
Yeah.
ask dad to walk with you through those times. Because it's not always a thing or a topic, but to walk through your wound is genuinely the hardest thing that any Christian person will ever do. Why? Because it's the least walked path. Because who wants to walk that path of pain? Who wants to walk through the path that the Christian world doesn't even talk to you about? They don't talk to you about, to be able to heal, you have to go and dad will then, not you, dad himself will bring it to your attention through an event in your life. And dad's like, I need you to look at this. And you're like, I don't want to look at it. And dad's like, look, because this is getting between you and me. And I need you to walk through this so that somebody going through that pain, going through that wound, you can minister onto them. That will be one step closer to dad. But it also prepares you for that other person that you don't really know about, that dad's preparing you for. Each healing event, each wound that you walk through with dad will get you closer to the relationship that you never thought possible.
She's preaching now.
And it is mind-boggling. My heart is always crying because I have had such a wonderful conversation with so many individuals, because I walked with dad through wounds in my life. Next thing I know, I'm talking to individuals in the church or anywhere, and we're having a moment where dad is front and center. I didn't even know. So walk through your wound, and dad will bring up the barriers that you accidentally, it happens, that was put there by the devil himself. And he asked, like, hey, could you address this? I will walk with you with it, but I need you to walk through it with me so that the person that's their wound, you'll walk with them with that. And so it's an amazing space to be in through the healing, but mostly if you walk with your wound with dad, dad will bring up something. Walk with dad, and it's going to be painful and uncomfortable, and it's uncomfortable Christianity.
Yeah. But it's so worth it.
And it's amazing how healing, and understand that I call them pocket Christianity, because each person that's healed has a spiritual gift that can only another person that actually in that spot that person can only talk to.
Yeah, within the sphere of influence, as it were.
Yeah, and so it's an interesting space. I'm grateful. It sucks, just so that you know. But being an unconventional, apparently, Christian.
Yeah.
To be able to let dad walk with you in the place where you're the most vulnerable, the place that hurts like none other, and then be at the end of that and being like, that sucked, but dang, I didn't know this was kind of relationship that I could have with dad.
Yeah.
And then he doesn't bring it to you all at once. He brings it to you in pieces. He knows who you are. He knows exactly what needs to be happening. But the question always is that I have is, will you let dad love you the way he wants to love you? Or do you want to be in control? Because there's comfortable Christianity, which is you're in control of your relationship with dad. And there's uncomfortable Christianity, which is way worth it. And that is letting him love you truly and wholly the way he designed you and the way he's walking with us. So that's unconventional Christianity.
This is why I can't have an agenda with her, because she's always going to just go off into left field, but somehow brings it back in. It's awesome.
Sorry.
Don't apologize for your gifting, my love. So I think I'm going to finish this episode by talking about something else that's really important as to why we need to know about the wounds that we've taken. And that is because of those agreements that we've made. Those can act as gateways or open doors for spiritual warfare. Those can allow our enemy to lay claim to us because we've agreed with a lie that he's put into our hearts or into our life. So this is like serious stuff. And I don't really care what your denominational background is. I don't really care what your personal ideology is. The fact that this stuff has happened in my own life, and maybe in another episode we'll talk about our unique warfare journey. Because I've seen it happen in my life, no one's going to tell me that it's not real. Just because it hasn't happened in your life, maybe, doesn't mean that it isn't real for those of us that it has. And I almost guarantee you it has happened in your life. You're just not aware of it. So I think that's going to be it for this week. A little bit of a different vibe, a little bit of a different look and feel, but I don't know. I like it.
Me too.
It's fun. She was really not wanting to be on camera when I started this thing. And then she's only recently come around.
This is a challenging topic, but it's one that I can breathe into because of the journey that I'm taking.
Yeah.
In any way, shape, or form, the moment you become healed and when you walk through those wounds with Dad, I can assure you it's a very different feeling because you're healing. And a healed Christian is a bizarre Christian because they hold themselves way differently. And they talk with a lot of power. And it's an interesting space to be in when I am in a Christian setting and when we go do our jobs, because it's unconventional. And so when you walk through this journey, I'm not saying if, because the fact of the matter is I challenge all of you guys. Ask Dad, what is keeping that relationship with him? What is keeping that from happening any further? And I challenge you all to ask him, hey, Dad, where are you? And what needs to happen? What barrier is it between you and I that I need to walk through? And understand, Dad is one of those individuals that's like, challenge accepted. Be aware that at the end of that message, you're going to feel it. And Dad's going to bring whatever that is that's keeping that relationship with him. And you're going to just challenge you to walk through it. That one. And then after that, ask Dad. It's like, and then ask him whenever you feel comfortable, what's my true name? And what did you call me out to be? Even as pastors, even as leaders. Because Dad is an amazing God. But challenge yourself to ask him what he wants. And what wound do you need to look at?
And for goodness sakes, if you haven't read While the Art of Captivating, do it. Both of them. I don't care if you're a man or a woman. Do both. Because you need to understand both.
And even as a couple, we read it as a couple the first time, and now I'm reading Captivating, and I'm actually doing the workbook with Captivating and journaling at the same time. So be aware that Dad will challenge accepted, and the outcome in that, I can't promise it, and I'm not going to swear by it. But ask Dad, because there is always a barrier that keeps that relationship from blossoming and be helping you become the best version of yourself. To you, forget the rest of the church, forget that, and how about become the best version of yourself, the best son and daughter underneath heaven, and be healed.
Which we'll get into next week. Promise. She may or may not be back. I don't know. It depends how she's feeling.
I'm not a big fan, but I adore my husband, and Dad called me out. Dad called me out on this. This was a challenge that he gave me, so
yeah.
I apparently agree.
She was willing. Till next week. God bless.